Dr. Adrian Blackwood had seen death too many times. In the dimly lit corridors of St. Francis Memorial Hospital, where the scent of antiseptic mixed with desperation, he had fought tirelessly to save lives. But nothing had prepared him for the case of Michael Reeves. Michael was brought in one stormy night, his body broken and bloodied, barely clinging to life. The paramedics said he had been found on the side of a deserted highway, with no witnesses and no apparent explanation for his injuries. His pulse was weak, his breathing shallow. The hospital staff whispered among themselves. Michael was a lost cause. But Dr. Blackwood refused to accept that. As he worked through the night, performing one life-saving procedure after another, strange things began happening. The machines monitoring Michael's vitals flickered erratically. His heart rate spiked and dropped without reason, and shadowy figures were glimpsed in the periphery of the ICU. Nurses reported hearing whispers when they were alone. Footsteps echoed in empty hallways. Determined to uncover the truth, Dr. Blackwood delved into Michael's past. What he found sent shivers down his spine. Michael had been presumed dead 2 years ago in a car accident. Yet, here he was, very much alive but barely breathing. The deeper Adrian dug, the more sinister the mystery became. Reports were missing from hospital records. Police files had been redacted. It was as if something was erasing his past. One night, as he pored over medical files, a cryptic message appeared on his computer screen. "Stop trying to save him. You don't know what you're dealing with." Adrian felt a chill crawl up his spine. Who didn't want Michael to live? And why? Ignoring the warning, he continued his relentless effort to stabilize Michael. But the closer he got to reviving him, the more bizarre events unfolded. Medical reports vanished. Surveillance footage was erased. And then came the phone call, a voice distorted and hollow. "If he wakes up, you die." Torn between fear and duty, Adrian pushed forward. He was a doctor. His job was to save lives, no matter the cost. But as Michael finally opened his eyes, a terrifying truth unraveled, one that would change Adrian's life forever. Had he just brought back into the world? The room grew eerily silent as Michael's eyes locked onto Adrian's, not with the dazed confusion of a recovering patient, but with an unsettling awareness, as if he had seen beyond the veil of death and returned with knowledge no human should possess. Adrian felt his own heartbeat quicken as Michael's lips parted, and a whisper, barely audible yet laced with something ancient and powerful, escaped. "They are coming." The lights flickered violently, casting twisted shadows on the walls, and an unnatural wind howled through the sterile halls of the hospital. Adrian turned sharply as the machines connected to Michael surged uncontrollably, alarms blaring, the room vibrating with an unseen force. A sudden knock at the door made him jump, but when he turned, the hallway beyond was empty. Then, Michael sat up suddenly, violently, as if controlled by an unseen force. His eyes glowed an unnatural shade, his breathing rapid, yet eerily controlled. "They are already here," he murmured, his voice layered, as if more than one presence spoke through him. Adrian stumbled backward, his mind racing. This was beyond medical science. This was something ancient, something forbidden. The monitors blared in protest, but Michael's vitals weren't failing. They were stabilizing at an inhuman rate. His wounds, deep and fatal, just hours ago, had begun closing before Adrian's eyes. "Who are you?" Adrian gasped. Michael turned, a slow, deliberate motion, his gaze piercing through Adrian like ice. "You should have let me die." The room erupted into chaos. A glass vial shattered behind Adrian, sending shards scattering across the tile floor. The overhead lights surged to a near-blinding brightness before cutting out completely, plunging the room into darkness. Outside, the emergency generator flickered, barely keeping up with the energy drain. Adrian could hear distant screams, panicked voices calling out names. The hospital was in turmoil. Michael was the cause. Adrian turned to flee, but Michael's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with impossible strength. The contact sent a jolt through Adrian's body, like static electricity mixed with raw, unfiltered dread. Visions flooded his mind, war-torn landscapes, cities consumed by darkness, skies choked with fire. He saw beings with hollow eyes watching from the shadows, waiting. He saw himself lying motionless on a cold metal slab, his own body lifeless, his own soul screaming. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Adrian collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Michael was still there, but his body was convulsing, fighting against whatever force had momentarily taken control. His lips parted, and his voice, now his own, escaped in a broken whisper. "Help me before they take me again." Adrian knew then that saving Michael Reeves was not just about preserving a single life. It was about stopping something much greater, something far more dangerous. and he had just become part of it. Determined to uncover the full extent of the mystery, Adrian spent the next several nights combing through old medical records, police reports, and anything he could find regarding Michael Reeves. The more he read, the more the pieces didn't add up. How could a man declared dead in a confirmed car wreck suddenly reappear, battered and dying, yet still breathing? His fingerprints matched exactly with the records, but there was something else, a discrepancy in his DNA analysis, something no scientist could explain. Adrian's obsession grew, his once methodical mind spiraling into sleepless paranoia. The hospital staff noticed his sunken eyes, his shaking hands, but he refused to let go. He had to know the truth. And then the whispers started. At first, they were faint, distant murmurs echoing through the hospital corridors at night, but soon they grew louder, more insistent. And worst of all, they knew his name. "Dr. Blackwood, you should not have saved him," the voices hissed, disembodied, yet filled with a presence too real to ignore. Shadows danced at the edges of his vision, the very walls of the hospital seeming to breathe as he passed. And then Michael spoke again. "They know you're trying to stop them," he rasped, his voice dry but eerily steady. "You should run while you can." But Adrian had never been one to run. He needed to understand. He needed to see. What was lurking behind Michael's return? What forces had vested interest in keeping him dead? The clock was ticking, and Adrian realized he might already be too deep in something far beyond his control. The final horror was yet to come, but he could feel it closing in, suffocating the air around him like an invisible noose tightening with each passing second. If he didn't find the truth soon, it wouldn't just be Michael in danger, it would be him, too, and perhaps the entire world. The hospital was no longer a place of healing. It had become a battlefield between forces unseen and a man determined to fight them. Dr. Adrian Blackwood could feel it, the suffocating presence of something unnatural lurking in the sterile hallways, something that had followed Michael Reeves back from the abyss of death. Days passed, but the strange occurrences only escalated. Nurses resigned abruptly, their faces pale, their voices shaking with fear. The janitor, who had worked at St. Francis for over 30 years, disappeared without a trace. Security cameras caught glimpses of shifting shadows, of doors opening and closing on their own, of indistinct figures watching from dark corners. Patients whispered of nightmares, of a looming darkness that seeped into their dreams and left them waking up in cold sweats. Adrian barely slept. His once steady hands trembled as he flipped through Michael's medical charts, looking for any rational explanation for what was happening. But rationality had left this case long ago. Michael should have died. His injuries were fatal, and yet, not only had he survived, but he was healing at an unnatural pace. Wounds that should have taken months to mend were now fading into nothingness within hours. His heartbeat was stronger than ever, his reflexes faster. He was changing, and he was remembering. "They did something to me," Michael murmured one night, as Adrian sat by his bedside. His eyes, once a dull brown, now held an eerie glint, almost reflective, as if he were looking through Adrian rather than at him. "I don't know who they are, but they're coming." "Who, Michael? Who did this to you?" Adrian's voice was tight with urgency, his fingers gripping the edges of Michael's hospital bed. Michael's breath hitched, his fingers curling into the thin sheets. "I don't know their names, but I remember their voices. I remember pain, endless pain. I wasn't supposed to come back." A cold chill crawled up Adrian's spine. "Then why did you?" Michael turned his head slowly, his gaze burning into Adrian's. "Because you wouldn't let me go." Before Adrian could respond, the hospital was plunged into chaos. The power cut out, leaving only the red emergency lights casting an ominous glow down the halls. Monitors blared in protest, beeping erratically as the air thickened with an unnatural silence. A scream pierced the darkness raw, terrified. Then another and another. Adrian jumped to his feet, his instincts kicking in. He ran toward the sound, pushing past panicked nurses and stumbling patients. The ICU doors burst open, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The walls were covered in symbols, jagged, ancient marks that pulsed with a sickly glow. The floor was slick with blood, though no bodies lay in sight. And in the center of it all stood a figure. No, not a figure, a thing. It was draped in shadows, its limbs elongated, its face obscured by something shifting, something alive. It turned toward Adrian, and though it had no eyes, he felt it staring straight into his soul. "You should not have saved him," it rasped. Adrian couldn't breathe. His chest tightened as if unseen hands were crushing his ribs. He staggered backward, his mind screaming at him to run, to get out. to leave Michael and this nightmare behind, but he couldn't, because behind the creature, on the hospital bed, in the middle of the room, Michael was convulsing violently, his body arching upward, his mouth open in a silent scream. The symbols on the walls pulsed brighter, matching the rhythm of his erratic heartbeat. Adrian knew then that Michael wasn't just a man who had returned from the dead. He was a gateway, and something was trying to come through. The hospital shook, as if an earthquake had struck. Lights exploded, raining down shards of glass, the air filled with an unbearable noise, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Shadows slithered across the walls, moving with intelligence, reaching for him. Adrian grabbed the nearest metal tray and hurled it at the creature, but it passed straight through, as if the thing wasn't entirely in this reality. Desperation clawed at him. He needed to stop this. He needed to break whatever was happening before it was too late. He turned back to Michael. The younger man's eyes had rolled back, his veins darkening, spreading like ink beneath his skin. His body was the epicenter of this chaos. If Adrian could wake him, if he could bring him back fully, maybe, just maybe, he could stop it. Ignoring the primal fear screaming in his mind, Adrian lunged toward Michael's bedside. He grabbed the man's shoulders, shaking him violently. "Michael, wake up, fight it!" Michael's body jerked, his lips parted, and for a brief moment, Adrian saw something else staring back at him. Something ancient, something unrecognizable. "Run," Michael whispered, "before they make me kill you." And then his eyes turned completely black. Adrian had no time to react before an invisible force threw him backward, sending him crashing into the wall. Pain exploded through his skull, but he forced himself up, gasping for breath. He had to do something. He had to stop this before. The creature stepped closer, its elongated fingers stretching toward Michael. The shadows coiled tighter, the symbols burning brighter. Whatever was trying to break through it was almost here. Adrian made a decision. If saving Michael meant unleashing whatever horror lurked beyond, then he had only one option left. He had to let him die. Gritting his teeth, he grabbed a syringe from the nearby table, filling it with the strongest sedative available. He hesitated for only a second before plunging the needle into Michael's arm. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the room exploded with light. A sound like shattering glass filled the air. The creature screamed, a horrible, inhuman wail, as its form distorted, flickering in and out of existence. The shadows writhed, recoiling as if burned. The symbols on the walls began to fade, their glow dimming, their power weakening. Michael's body convulsed once more before going limp. His breathing slowed, his heartbeat softened, and then silence. The hospital stood still. The walls stopped, trembling. The darkness that had loomed over them dissipated, retreating back into whatever abyss it had crawled from. Adrian fell to his knees, his chest heaving. It was over, or so he thought, because as he looked down at Michael, he saw the faintest flicker of movement beneath his closed eyelids. And when those eyes opened once more, they weren't Michael's anymore. Something else had taken his place, and it was still hungry. The nightmare had only just begun.